This Brooklyn Nets team is definitely one of the most talented teams in the league, but I think that you could actually argue that they're the most talented team in the league on paper. They've got star power, they've got young talent, and they have good role players too. Overall, they just have a lot of depth, and honestly, it's going to be hard for Steve Nash and the rest of that coaching staff because there are a lot of guys on that team that are really deserving of minutes. But even in spite of that, even in spite of all their depth, their talent, there are a lot of people that have doubts about this team. And while their concerns are definitely legitimate, I feel like when we choose to focus on the potential negatives of this team, we kind of lose sight of the glaring positives that are associated with this team. I mean, after all, if this team reaches their full potential, they could, legitimately compete for a championship. And there's not too many teams in the league that you can really say that about, and the Brooklyn Nets are one of those teams. I mean, first of all, they've got a ton of offensive talent, a ton of guys that can just really create their own offense, like Kyrie and KD. We know what they can do. Spencer Dinwiddie can create for himself. Karis LeVert can score. Even Landry Shamet, to a lesser degree, can create his own offense. On top of that, they've got a lot of nice shooters too. I've seen some people say that they're kind of concerned about the three-point shooting on this team. I don't really know about that. I mean, they've got Kyrie, they've got KD, Joe Harris, Taurean Prince, Landry Shamet, as I mentioned earlier. Dinwiddie and LeVert can hit the three to a lesser degree, but they can still, hit it. They're respectable. So I don't really know. I don't think it's not gonna be a big concern for them. It's something that they're gonna be good at. Maybe they're not gonna be like the best three-point shooting team in the league, but they're going to be a good three-point shooting team. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think where we can start to see issues with this team is in the offensive schemes, right? We know that Steve Nash is a rookie head coach. We don't really know what his schemes are going to look like. There's been coaches that have had star players, and they've been accused of not really coaching them. Like Scott Brooks when he was in OKC. People criticized him and said, oh, he kind of just basically gives the ball to Russell Westbrook and KD and lets them do their thing, and that's basically his offense. So is Steve Nash going to be able to, kind of create an offense around the guys that he has, or is he going to kind of just say, okay, guys, do whatever you want? We don't know yet, and we know that Mike D'Antoni's on that staff, and when he was in Houston, his kind of style of offense was just give James Harden the ball, play fast, and let him kind of do whatever he wants. And while that was successful in the regular season, that wasn't very successful in the playoffs. So, maybe the Nets could have a really good regular season record, but come playoff time, if their offense is kind of too much like a D'Antoni offense, I don't know how successful that's going to be come playoff time. However, I feel like as long as this team is moving the ball around decently well, they don't have to be swinging the ball and playing like the Spurs used to play when they had Duncan and Ginobili and Parker with tons of ball movement. They don't necessarily have to be doing that. I just don't want to see them kind of resort to iso ball and stuff like that, because that would just kind of limit them as a team. I think it's a good thing to have. It's good to be able to score in iso situations, but I don't want to see them rely on that. However, I feel like Brooklyn has the potential to be a team that can share the ball pretty well with each other. They've got a lot of creators on this team, like Dinwiddie and Kyrie. They can create, they can collapse the defense. Same with Karis and KD. Shamet can do it too. They've got a number of guys that can do things with the ball in their hands, and we've seen a lot of times championship teams win because they have a number of guys that can create and a number of guys that can make plays with the ball in their hands. We often give credit to guys for averaging like high assist numbers, like 9-10 assists per game, and leading the league in assists or whatnot. And while it's a great individual accomplishment, it's not really, it doesn't really correlate with team success per se, because if you have a guy that just averages a ton of assists, usually that means that the team is very over-reliant on him. And we've never really seen, outside of LeBron James last year with the Lakers, we've never really seen a team that can win that way. And even going into the playoffs, people thought that the Clippers were going to beat the Lakers, kind of for that reason, because the Clippers had more guys that could, that were more reliable with the ball in their hands and stuff. It was the Lakers were kind of looked at as a top-heavy team, right? They had LeBron and they had AD, but the Clippers, they had Kawhi, PG, and a number of other really good players. So Brooklyn has that. They have that depth that other teams, that they might face in the playoffs don't necessarily have. So that's another advantage that I think people don't really talk about with the Brooklyn Nets that they could have over other teams. Another thing to talk about with this team is their defense. I think that this team is going to be a bit better on defense than a lot of people think they're going to be. I'm not saying they're going to be one of the top defenses in the league, but I think they'll be pretty good. KD showed that in Golden State. He can play defense if he just buys in. Earlier in his career, he was kind of looked at as a poor defender, but in Golden State, he really unlocked his defensive potential, and I think his impact on the defensive end is going to carry over to Brooklyn. Kyrie is also a pretty underrated defender, I think. I feel like he's a guy who in the regular season doesn't necessarily give as much effort on the defensive end, but come playoff time when there's more at stake and there's more high leverage moments, Kyrie has shown in those moments that he can defend when he really gives effort and locks in on that end, which is what ultimately matters for contending teams, right? So I think Kyrie is fine. DeAndre Jordan and Jarrett Allen, I think they can protect the rim, but I'm not sure how I feel about them, playing in the pick and roll and stuff like that. So we'll have to see how they are this year. I think what this Brooklyn team would really benefit from is going out and trying to get a specialist, a guy who's known as a good wing defender. Off the top of my head, I can't necessarily think of a guy that they could acquire, but this Nets team has a lot of depth, right? So they could definitely, come up with a trade to get a, good, reliable 3-and-D guy. Because as of right now, their best probably wing defender, their most versatile defender is Kevin Durant, right? And while Kevin Durant could definitely be put on some of the better wing players in the league, and he could do a pretty good job, I feel like you don't necessarily want him doing that because you want him to focus more of his energy for the offensive end, right? For scoring, for playmaking, and stuff like that. You don't want him wasting that energy on the defensive end and then limits him on the offensive end a little bit, right? So it would be good if they got out and made a trade and tried to acquire a good 3-and-D player. Maybe they'll just end up starting Taurean Prince over Joe Harris. They've been experimenting with different lineups in the preseason. We'll see what their, day one starting lineup is when they face the Warriors in the season opener. But yeah, this Brooklyn team would definitely benefit from going out and getting a 3-and-D player or two to help on the defensive end. The main concern that people have with this team, though, has to do with the potential chemistry issues. As good as Kyrie and KD have been throughout their career just as individual talents, I don't think there's too many people that have viewed them as leaders. I mean, there's all the quotes that have kind of been coming out about Kyrie where, he hasn't been speaking to the media because he called them pawns and stuff. And we know earlier, before a few months ago when Steve Nash was hired, he said that he didn't necessarily view Steve Nash as the head coach. I remember even last year there was an interview he did where he was kind of listing off the guys on the team that he viewed as core players, and there were certain guys that he didn't list that are still on this team now. And it's just, even if you go back on things like that, those things were still said, and the guys that you were saying those things about, they're going to kind of remember those things still, especially when everything is going bad. Let's say Brooklyn goes on a bad losing streak, they lose 3 or 4 games in a row and the team doesn't look good. There's going to be stories coming out, and especially with the New York media, there's going to be all these stories coming out. The media is going to be hounding them. It's not a good look when your leader is causing these types of distractions, right? And then with KD, I remember I saw a podcast recently where Draymond was talking about the kind of attitude KD was giving on the Warriors after they had won that first championship together and KD had got his first Finals MVP. I guess what Draymond was trying to say was that KD was upset that he wasn't getting enough credit for the Finals MVP and the championship, and he was upset because of that. And it just makes me worry because this Brooklyn Nets team is really deep, and there's going to be some nights where Kyrie is the main reason for winning. There's going to be some nights where Dinwiddie has an amazing game, or Karis LeVert has an amazing game, or any of these other guys on the team, step up and are, I guess, the main reason for winning in that particular night, or even in a playoff series, So it just makes me wonder, is KD going to be happy if the team wins on, as a result of someone else stepping up? Or is he only going to be happy if the team wins on his terms, right? Because if that becomes evident, really clear in, early on in the season, then yeah, that could just divide the team, and it's not going to look good. It's not going to look good if his teammates sense that, right? So I think that this team, as talented as they are, because we need to acknowledge their talent, they're extremely talented offensively. I think they're going to be decent defensively. They'll be good enough defensively. As talented as they are, there are reasons to be concerned about their chemistry. And I mean, even just bringing in all these new pieces, they're going to have to adjust. Like, I remember when LeBron first came to Cleveland, they won like 51 games or something like that. And that wasn't an 82-game season. So, Brooklyn would probably be on pace to win about that many this season if it was 82 games. But because it's just a 72-game season, I got them going 45-27 and finishing 4th in the East. And just because I have this team 4th doesn't mean that I have them as my 4th best team in the East. I think honestly, if they reach their full potential and they're really clicking by playoff time, they could arguably be the best team in the East. They'd be right up there with the Bucks. So we'll have to see. I mean, in the playoffs, there's a good chance that we don't even have fans, and there's not even really a home court advantage. So that could even help Brooklyn out a little bit if they finish like 4th and they have to play some playoff series where they're the lower seed. That could help them out a bit. And on top of that, if they're clicking and everything, this team could really surprise a lot of people in the playoffs, and I could see them coming out of the East if everything goes well. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see if they can play well together, if chemistry doesn't become a big problem. But yeah, if they can figure things out, this team's got a lot of potential.